Human beings are defined by our ability to transform the world around us. Through our conscious action, we've constructed a world which is suited to our needs. We've built vast cities filled with conveniences and amenities. Our transportation systems extend around the planet, and our communication systems allow us to reach virtually anyone, anywhere, at any time, instantaneously. We've also built a stunning procession of human societies with staggering complexity and variety. Over the centuries, we've developed art and literature and music and science and language and customs and traditions which demonstrate the infinite depth of human consciousness. And for all the beauty and richness of the world which we've transformed so deeply and so thoroughly for ourselves, we also know that there have been horrifying downsides. We've built institutions which imprison and enslave millions of our fellow human beings. We've crafted devastating machinery of war and subjugation. We've developed an economic system we call capitalism, which empowers a startlingly small minority of human beings to exploit and control the vast majority of the wealth and resources which the working class has collectively labored to amass and develop. And, perhaps most alarmingly of all, we've now begun to devastate the natural environment of our planet, which gave rise to life itself. The human beings who have the most power on our planet, the billionaires and political leaders of the wealthiest nations on Earth, do not seem concerned with these problems, which are leading us down a road into darkness and calamity. On the contrary, they seem to be ushering it on with callous populism and demagoguery, which solves few, if any, of these problems while building wealth and power for their own privileged class to ever higher reaches of obscene disparity. And they're doing it through these very destructive systems, which will be our downfall. While many of the rest of us who lack the power and wealth of the ruling class are unhappy with the systems which govern our lives and destroy our world, we've become so downtrodden and so lost that we find ourselves without hope, without any sense of what to do. Just toiling to survive alone is struggle enough, leaving precious little time, energy, or resources to push for meaningful change. But plenty of us, finding ourselves with nothing to lose but our chains, do want to fight, and seeing the world for what it is, we come to call ourselves revolutionaries, socialists, anarchists, communists, and we build movements with the ambition of taking down the brutal system of capitalist oppression, to change the direction of humanity, in short, to free ourselves, to deliver our fellow human beings from oppression, and to save our world from ecological destruction. Towards these ends, we come together and we try to build movements of resistance with the hopes of directing our collective efforts towards changing human society. This is the goal of every political movement, to change society. Every revolutionist path begins with a realization that the world we have built is fundamentally unjust and that human society must change. And if I want to see that change, then I, myself, must act to change it. Such realization comes from a powerful place which we call the human imagination. It is only through conscious imagining that we can envision a world which is better than the one we currently inhabit. It is this incredible power which we humans have, which has given rise to science, to art, to all the wonderful things which make life worth living. Through imagination, we can look at a situation and say, this is not ideal. We can change this into something better. Revolutionists dare to apply our imagination at a grand scale. We're bold enough to imagine changing all of society, to free all of humanity from oppression, and the path of the revolutionary begins with a spark of imagination when we see the world and dare to dream up the notion, all of this could be better. Unfortunately, there are hard limits to our imagination. We can't simply will our dreams into reality. To bring about desired changes, we have to put in the work, and that work has to suit the material conditions which surround us. And this leads us to the first great challenge of the revolutionist. We must find ways to align our dreams with what's possible in reality. We may dream of overthrowing the bourgeois state, but the state has erected massive material barriers to achieving such a dream. Everything from banks and corporations which withhold resources and drive most human beings into stifling poverty, to cultural institutions and bigotries which keep us divided and conquered, to militaries and police forces which will resort to violence to crush any attempts by the oppressed to seize power for ourselves. In the face of such a harsh juggernaut of material power, many revolutionists never move beyond the stage of dreaming. We imagine a better world, but we can't imagine the steps it would take to get from here to there. But for those of us who do try to press forward despite the odds, we quickly come up against another sort of barrier, this one within our own consciousness. You see, every revolutionary wants to transform the world, but where we often err is in failing to see how the world has transformed us. For For all of our loathing of capitalism, we are all too often completely unable to see how deeply we ourselves are affected from having lived our entire lives under capitalism. We are so emboldened by our realization that things could be better and so intoxicated by the dream of building a better world that we overlook our own false consciousness and adherence to elements of bourgeois civil society which undermine our movements and prevent us from achieving our revolutionary ambitions. As anarchists, we seek to dissolve all hierarchies, but we are often all too unwilling to examine our own participation in those hierarchies whenever they benefit us. For example, the black anarchist Lorenzo Kom'boa Ervin wrote of the ways in which white anarchists habitually fail to address our own internalized white supremacism. It's important for anti-racist, anti-colonial activists to continue trying to dismantle racism inside these movements or organizations, and, failing that, to dismantle the groups themselves entirely. Activists must recognize the damage of internal racism, the politics which support it, and how to deal with it, and then act swiftly and forcefully, sometimes even ruthlessly. The truth is that most anti-racist white radicals cannot bring themselves to bring the needed cold-blooded efficiency and commitment to the task. They are lured away from their task by friendships with other white people in the group, their fear of being excluded or shunned, lack of commitment to the struggle, lack of consistent support of peoples of color, and compromising or selling out to their own deep-seated racism and political opportunism. As communists, we seek to build a collectivist world in which all is distributed from each according to our ability and to each according to our needs, but we are oblivious to the individualistic and competitive mindset which capitalism has planted deep within our consciousness. Capitalist society stifles collectivism at every level. We are taught to distrust each other, compete with each other, and demean each other at every turn. In our schools, in our workplaces, and in the mass media which we consume every day of our lives, we are conditioned into a sort of mass solipsism. Capitalism wants us to imagine ourselves as the center of the universe, as the hero of every story, as the main character. This is especially true for those of us who grew up with any measure of privilege. As a white, male-presenting US American, I can tell you this sort of individualism and self-centeredness was instilled within me deeply growing up. It has been encouraged and rewarded in my professional life, and overconfidence and arrogance are seen as attractive qualities in broad society. We seek to change society, but society affects us so deeply, so thoroughly, that we can't even tell. This manifests in our movements in so many ways. I can't tell you how many encounters I've had with communists and anarchists who very clearly see themselves as the smartest person in every room, who see activism as a competitive endeavor and a platform for showing off, and I gotta say, I've been guilty of this myself on many occasions. How many pissing contests have we witnessed on the left over who's read more theory or who's done more praxis or who is and isn't qualified to be part of the revolution? How much time do we waste going on witch hunts to determine who counts as truly working class or pitting one form of oppression against another instead of trying to grasp how they might intersect? How much of our so-called political discourse is really just thinly veiled consumer culture in which we bicker about individual personalities who in the grand scheme of things mean nothing and are all but irrelevant in wider society? Notice I'm using the pronoun we here in this diatribe. I'm not delivering these critiques from on high. Again, I myself have been guilty of all these weaknesses and failings and more. Every day I discover prejudices and shortcomings festering in my own mind. I myself am not immune to the false consciousness and arrogant self-centeredness that I'm describing. I often find myself seeking out drama or lapsing into a competitive mindset which wastes precious time and energy. But all that said, I do believe change and growth are possible. When I was younger, I was terrified that my peers might discover that I wasn't the smartest person in the room. Whenever I found out I was wrong about something, or whenever I uncovered some personal flaw or inability within myself, it filled me with dread and misery. I wanted to be the dude who exuded confidence in perfection, who everyone looked up to, and when I failed publicly or was proven wrong about something, the embarrassment cut deep. As I've grown older, I've come to see the toxicity of this mindset. As human beings, we are all frail and fragile and prone to errors and lapses of judgment. That humans are all imperfect creatures is a cliche to declare, but to incorporate this knowledge into our own sense of self in a world which demands an appearance of perfection is extremely challenging. It's easy to feel depressed and hopeless when we realize how flawed and inefficient we as revolutionists might be, thanks to the deep impact which capitalism has had on all of us. When I look at all the unnecessary infighting and competition in leftist spaces, it can be overwhelming. We have such a long way to go. Sure, Some organizations are doing great, kicking ass, getting a lot done, but there's just so much more to do. There's so much more we need to be doing, and it's hard to get things done when we're all set against one another by the personal depravities which bourgeois civil society has instilled within us, especially when we're not willing to recognize our own shortcomings. Each and every one of us who have spent our lives in capitalist society has been deeply affected by capitalism. We are all affected, yet we have a tendency to dramatically downplay these effects which capitalist society has had upon us. We tend to think ourselves immune to the heavy indoctrination which capitalism has imposed upon us. After all, we hate capitalism. How could we be under its sway? But deprogramming from such deep brainwashing, and it is brainwashing, is extremely difficult work. It requires us to be on constant guard, to struggle tirelessly with our own prejudices and preconceptions and behavior and thought patterns. Theodor Adorno was a Marxist philosopher who was deeply concerned with what he called critical self-reflection. Through this process, Adorno encouraged us to constantly and deeply critique ourselves, society, and the ways in which human society affects us as individuals. Adorno was a German Jewish man who lived through the period of the Holocaust, and the horrors of Auschwitz and other Nazi concentration camps impressed upon him the need for all of us to critically examine the relationship we have with society. Adorno believed that capitalism conditioned people to become selfish and self-serving, which is what allowed such horrid atrocities as the Holocaust to occur. The inability to identify with others was unquestionably the most important psychological condition for the fact that something like Auschwitz could have occurred in the midst of more or less civilized and innocent people. One pursues one's own advantage before all else, and simply not to endanger oneself does not talk too much. That is a general law of the status quo. One must come to know the mechanisms that render people capable of such deeds, must reveal these mechanisms to them, and strive by awakening a general awareness of those mechanisms to prevent people from becoming so again. Only those who unreflectingly vented their hate and aggression upon them are guilty. One must labor against this lack of reflection, must dissuade people from striking outward without reflecting upon themselves. The only education that has any sense at all is an education toward critical self-reflection. If you were raised in a developed capitalist country, you were heavily indoctrinated by the most powerful and imposing civilization in human history. You grew up in the culture that invented white supremacism, enacted countless genocides, and constructed a highly sophisticated propaganda apparatus to bend you to the will of the ruling class through scientific mechanisms. Vast fortunes, billions upon billions of dollars, have been expended to implant capitalist ideology deep in your psyche from the moment you were born up until this moment. If you think you are immune, if you think you have cast off the mental chains and freed yourself from the prison in your mind, you are almost certainly fooling yourself. Most of us will probably never fully recover from the psychic trauma and mental conditioning which we've gone through. Even if we manage to claw our way up out of this mire of indoctrination, we'll need to be on high alert for the rest of our lives to make sure we don't slip back into the ways of bourgeois civil society which runs so deeply in our subconscious selves. We as revolutionists seek to change capitalist society, but all too often we fail to understand just how much capitalism has affected us. This, I believe, is the reason leftist politics and the imperial core so often devolve into a team sports realm of competitive bridge burning and performative divisiveness. Italian anarchist Errico Malatesta once cautioned, "It is up to the revolutionaries, especially the anarchists and socialists, to see to the uniting of the working class by not exaggerating the differences and paying attention above all to the realities and objectives which can unite us and assist us to draw the greatest possible revolutionary advantage from the present situation. Alone, we cannot subdue fascism, even less destroy existing institutions. So either we must unite with those who, though not anarchists, share short-term common objectives with us, or allow that the fascists, with the connivance of the government, should be free to terrorize the country." It's been almost exactly 100 years since Malatesta wrote those words, and it seems like today the left is more fractured than ever. The structural qualities of social media exacerbate these problems, making it easier for us to give in to our own individualistic vanities of competition, as well as giving alt-right trolls and other bad actors an easy way to disrupt and divide us. And yeah, that sucks. These are problems that are going to be very difficult to solve. But lately, I've been trying to look at this situation with hopefulness. Sure, the Western left is deeply flawed and broken, and we have a long way to go and a lot of growing up to do. But this just means that we have a tremendous amount of unrealized potential. If we do manage to erode the false consciousness within ourselves, to dissolve the individualistic and competitive mindsets which plague all of us, and to overcome our differences, to work towards common goals, just think of what we might be able to accomplish. Just as we have nothing to lose but our chains, we only really have one direction in which we can head, and that's up. As undeveloped as we are, we have so much potential for growth, and that gives me hope that we might be able to align our dreams with reality, dissolve that false consciousness, and find a path forward to victory. This is NonCompete. Thanks for watching.